Thank you, Paul. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with PEC. I very much value the work that PEC has done, particularly in the area of global warming or climate change. And the roadmap was a uniquely important contribution to sensible thinking. I had a really sort of specific and probably dry, and given the quality of the panelists before me, probably very repetitive presentation. And I decided to junk it. So I'm flying without a safety net here. So the reason I decided to junk it was I wanted to actually go up about 30,000 feet and think about what we're all trying to do in climate change. And what precipitated this decision, we'll soon find out whether it's a good or bad decision, to junk my prepared remarks, was this headline in the Wall Street Journal. I don't know if you've seen it, but I will read it. U.S. plans rescue of AIG to halt crisis. Central banks inject cash as credit dries up. Subheadline, lending between banks seizes up. Subheadline, emergency loans for giant insurer aimed at averting collapse. Historic move comes amid worries about money market funds. There are now apparently some money market funds that aren't redeemable at $1 in, $1 out. What does that possibly have to do with discussion about Act 70 and climate change? My concern is that it may take this equivalent crisis, not being 10 years distant or 20 years distant, or arguably 50 years distant or 100 years distant, to force the world and the United States to in fact act in their climate change. Is it going to take the equivalent of this to get our heads out of the sand, or can we collectively, mutually, think this through and act in a sensible way? I don't know. It's very much an open question. Let me say a couple other things that I think will go to determining whether that question gets answered in the negative. No, we can't think it through and act mutually without this, or whether it gets answered in the affirmative, and that we can. Obviously, Act 70 actually gives us a chance to start thinking it through and acting mutually to avoid that kind of headline. Here's some of the things that I think are going to determine whether or not it's going to take the collapse, the equivalent of the collapse of the financial system, to finally move to the side of the extremists who have too long dominated government, too long dominated media, and too long dominated thinking. I don't actually like ideologies. They make me uncomfortable because in my experience, I'm 52 years old, ideologues of the left and the right have one thing in common. Their ideology comes first. Their ideology is more important than the truth. Truth is inconvenient to an ideologue. It is what is to be swept away, lied away, ignored in the pursuit of the ideology. And I think that's true of the left, and I think that's true of the right. In my prior job, I've been attacked from the left and the right. When I was a public utility commissioner, I was called a communist by a utility after I had just given them $5 billion of stranded cost recovery, something that would have made Milton Friedman, who was not in the grave at that point, spin in a grave. And I was attacked from the left by consumers for giving a bailout to certain utilities. What I'm interested in is things that work. I'm interested in pragmatic solutions. Now, I think one of the impediments to things that work and pragmatic solutions are ideologues, of the left or the right. Very frankly, in the United States, the right, ideologues of the right have had much more influence and power in the last 30 years than the ideologues of the left. Another thing that is an impediment, however, of course, is self-interest. I don't expect people to check their self-interest at the door. And I think in any reasoned process, self-interests need to be expressed, they need to be heard, they need to be considered. But at the end of the day, it's up to the, I believe, a smart, effective government to sort out where the self-interest is consistent with the public interest and where it's not. Where it has to be trimmed, where perhaps even it has to be in some instances rejected. But I will say this, every self-interest is important. And where there are real losers in the process, I believe society and communities owe those losers compensation in some form or another. That's why I was in favor of stranded cost recovery. There was a change of rules in the middle of the game. Investments had been made. And those investments were made based upon prior expectations. It was the legislature, it wasn't the commission. The legislature, Governor Ridge, chose to change. And there would have been probably of the 6 major electric utilities in Pennsylvania, had we had no stranded cost recovery, if we had followed the rigid demands of right-wing free market orthodoxy on the question, we'd have bankrupted 5 out of 6 Pennsylvania electric utilities. To me, that wasn't a constructive, pragmatic, workable approach. So, one of the challenges that we all have, I think, is to make sure the ideologues on the left and the right don't dominate this process. I would suggest to you, I have a stake in trying to make sure they don't dominate other processes, but I am absolutely committed in terms of Act 70 and the writing of the plan, that they not dominate that process. I'm also absolutely committed to making sure self-interests are heard. We certainly have different interests within the room, that they're fully considered, that wherever possible they are accommodated. By wherever possible, I mean wherever it's possible to do so, while moving society forward on the question of climate change in a way that prevents, quote, this from happening. Now that probably means that I'm going to be a pinata in this process. But I'm not complaining about that. And I think at the end of the day, DEP is going to write a report with the help of the advisory committee that meets that test, meets that standard. And if it doesn't meet that test and that standard, then I'll be very disappointed, and criticisms directed my way will be on the mark. So, I wanted to share that with you about what I think, from a big picture standpoint, is critical about this process that we go into. There's a lot of information that we have to absorb. There's a lot of information that we have to consider. There are a lot of options that we have to understand, weigh. We have the right people part of that process to make sure all of that is in fact considered. And I would imagine there can be relatively few ideas at the end of the day that don't get reflected to some extent in the report and the recommendations. Whether it's sequestration of carbon dioxide, carbon capture and sequestration technologies, whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's alternative energy, whether it's biofuels, whether it's more efficiency in existing coal plants. There are a lot of ideas and options that contribute to solving this problem.